All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I know we had a busy day, and a lot of you are already thinking about how you're going to get home today. You're already in that mode. What else do I have to do? What can I start skipping on the schedule? So, I want to get started, try to give us a nice open discussion this morning. This started as a panel idea submitted last fall, and the two panel members that were going to join me on this unfortunately can't make it. So I had to rethink this. I said, can we still do it as a, as a roundtable open discussion? So I want to rush through a quick opening presentation and set the stage and see what you have to think. So far I've heard the last 2 days a lot of things that would fit well with this idea. I came across this the other day, how I hacked any Facebook account again. How many of you have a Facebook account? LinkedIn? Okay. How many of you use Twitter? Okay. All right. Well, what I want to look at is old communication in a new communication world. We're living in a new era, so are we just using new tools, or are we fundamentally changing at a theoretical level those old theories that we've always used in communication studies? And I don't know about you, but I have my favorite theories that I put in all my programs, and in different classes I use certain theories. And a few years ago I started looking at this, wanted to teach a special topics course about social media and some of the new trends in communication with some students. And some of the things that I discovered as I was putting that together, particularly in terms of old theory and trying to fit it to these new communication areas, just didn't work, or we're having to rethink it. So it became part of my regular teaching that I would introduce something like this. So yesterday, or the day before, I looked at my wife's Facebook account. And I just wanted to see what information is on there. And so I tried to put that together, and I found a lot of information about my wife, about her friends. I could jump to their links. The interesting thing is that my wife and I both closed our Facebook accounts because we're scared of it. So we closed it. She just happened to go back in and link into it the other day, put in her old password, and it showed right back up where she had left off. I said, Facebook never lets you go. It's like Hotel California. You can check out, but you never leave. I've just been using hers because I didn't want to try mine. So anyway, I came up, you can see all these things. Children's names, their pictures, where they go to school, their baseball team, photos, hometown addresses, hometown, where you went to school. A lot of information, not just biographical data, personal opinions on things, responses to grief when somebody says, feel bad for the family whose house burnt down, and people respond to those messages, and then you can jump into their pages and see what they have to say. I also check my wife's privacy settings, because you can change that, right? So that not everybody can see your stuff. Well, her privacy settings are wide open, so even if you have those privacy settings, that's no guarantee that people can't find a way into your things. You probably have heard horror stories of people who've been fired from pictures they didn't even post on their page. All right. So what's not on your site may be the bigger question. This is just one area to look at. If you're familiar with Altman and Taylor's social penetration theory, now there's a lot to that. They talk about stages we go through in forming relationships. It's a very linear theory, and there's some criticism against that. But there does seem to be some of these stages, or some back and forth through these stages. One of the things they point out in the theory is this idea of stable exchange when you reach that peak level or intimate relationship, close relationship. Nonverbals is a big part of that, according to the theory. Obviously, a lot of information shared, right? And that's what draws us closer. Yesterday, I got the pleasure of sitting, busting open crawdads next to Carlos, who refused to eat any of those. So I learned he doesn't like crawdads. At least he didn't want to try them. Even if I peeled them for him, he wasn't going to eat one. I learned a little bit about his mom and why he's here. I learned about what kind of job he does. I learned a little bit about his work ethic. A little bit of a spiritual insight there too. I learned where he's from, some of his experiences. I shared some of mine. That's a normal conversation, all right? So what kind of relationships? How does this work out? If you're familiar with it, one of the key things is this onion idea. How many different topics do you talk about with a person about your life? How much self-disclosure do you make? And then how deep do you go on? This might represent more of a workplace relationship where you don't talk a whole lot about your life, but you might go real deep on some of the work aspects, right? If you have a relationship that looks like this would be more of an intimate relationship. Do you agree? Okay. Carlos and I didn't get to that level. We were the other one. Okay. Now let's think back for a moment. What do you put on your Facebook site? How much information is out there about you? On Facebook, LinkedIn, your blogs, wherever, on your ACA email exchanges. How much could I get to know you without ever really meeting you face to face? So one of the things I try to show students, I'll put these diagrams up on the board blank. And I'll say, tell me some of the things you talk about with a close friend. And it will shade them in. How much do you share about that? Now I'll say, tell me what's on Facebook. Of course, none of them admit that that's their Facebook page. It's always a friend. This hyper-revelation. Okay? And when I put those side by side, I've had students who have gone back, changed their privacy settings, gotten off Facebook, and said they just didn't conceive of it that way. Now that's a whole different area of study. Okay? That in itself is a very rich area of study. But you know what I had trouble finding, just in the kind of preliminary stages of putting together research on this and some research ideas. I've had trouble finding studies that have looked at what is on Facebook as far as content area, topical, depth, this kind of stuff to reveal this kind of information. It's kind of like what you were saying yesterday, Thompson. There's limited information out there. So I was trying to find some things about that to kind of back up this and see, is there room for this? Is there anybody talking about this? And I couldn't find anything. Now, I don't know about your students, but I'm finding that my students who are leaving Facebook are not as big on Facebook now, and they're going more towards Twitter and other services, but it's still the same kind of self-revelation online. Okay? Here's the difference. Not only are you sharing it online, but according to Facebook's most recent statistics, they have over 1.11 billion users. You have the potential to be having an intimate self-disclosure to over 1 billion people, a tenth of the people on this planet. Clay Shirky said in an interview one time that it's kind of like leaving your diary on a park bench, open for anybody to read. I thought, no, that's not it at all. It's much worse. It's like leaving your diary digitally for anybody to access anytime, archived forever, and they can cut and paste, they can respond to it, they can pass it along, they can make fun of you, they can bully you, they can take advantage of you, steal your credit.
They can track you.
Okay? So all of that possibility. That's just one theory. So does it change what Altman and Taylor said? Do we need to revisit that and say, okay, it doesn't apply? Or do we need to say, well, how do we interpret it in today's world? Have we fundamentally changed as human beings? Or are we still communicating the same way we've always communicated? We're just finding new tools to do it. Different theory, attraction theory. These 4 things. We're attracted to people based on their looks. Are they close by? It's hard to have an attraction to somebody you never see or meet. Similarities, differences, complementaries to the differences side. But on the proximity scale, Match.com says 20% of our relationships get online now. I heard somebody mention that yesterday, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but from the just raise of hands that I've done with my students in classes in a West Texas little conservative area, that's plain out about true about those. How many have known somebody who's met somebody online that's developed a relationship with somebody online, a committed relationship? It seems to be holding up. So how does that affect proximity? Maybe we would need to redefine for attraction theory what is proximity, or what makes us feel that we're close to somebody. Okay? Along with that, what attracts us? There's Lauren Hollister. She was one of the people who was going to be on this panel and didn't get to be here. She looks at online multiplayer role-playing games. She did an ethnography of World of Warcraft. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her. She's in our community. She expressed interest in this, and from her studies, one of the things she shared with me, she looks more at the specific little iconic text-based messaging that they do in their speech bubbles between characters and the relationship development there. So she's a very niche focus. But one of the things she did talk about is this progression and the stages, these thresholds that people meet when they go from just being a character in the game, texting, to actually talking to each other in the game through a voice-activated device, or through voice modulation if they want to sound like a woman even though they're a man. And that created a whole interesting area for her. To when do they meet outside of the game world? Still in cyberspace, but outside the game world. These are thresholds, markers that's changed the relationship. To when do they meet face to face? If you just talk about adding the vocal aspect, if Moravian's anywhere close, that's 30% of our communication, is how we say what we say. So moving from text to vocal changes everything. So does that still fit with how we progress through relationship development? Or are we jumping ahead? Is that dangerous, or is that just the way we like to do it now? We're skipping stages into this hyper-revelation of ourselves. Okay, so those are just some of the things. So what are the theories? Here's some things that came up as I was thinking about this. I know you probably can't read it. That's okay. I wanted to impact you with how many different just examples I was able to throw together for this. Interpersonal needs theory, belonging, affection, control. How does that fit with this need, these new needs of I've got to be hyper-public? I've got to tweet about every time I take a bite of a sandwich at Subway and like it or don't like it. Because my 600 followers need to know that now. Or this, I don't know what else to call it, this voyeuristic kind of nosiness we have about everybody else's life and their Facebook pages and what's happening to them. How does that fit with this traditional interpersonal needs theory? In our textbook that we use in our classroom, in our listening, and I look back at the public speaking project to see if it was in that chapter, but in our textbook it uses this statistic and throws it up there. 53% of our communication is listening compared to the rest being reading, writing, and speaking combined. So over half of our communication is done in listening. Okay, well that makes sense. But how does that fit in a text-based world where it's all about writing and reading? Do we need to change that? Nap Evangelisti's relational stages, that kind of goes back to the social penetration model and those stages of relationship development. Do we need to revisit those? How does that fit with things like what Hollister found about stages of development relationship? Is it just mirroring it? Is it just a different tool? Is it just a different environment? Or does it fundamentally change the theory? Somebody said the other day, 75% of Americans fear public speaking. Was that one of y'all? It's my little Texas bit in there, I'm sorry. Do any of you say that? I remember it was said. Somebody said it here, so it must be true. Okay, so it must be true. All right, 75%, 3/4 of Americans. But when you look at how much stuff we put online, that's a form of public communication. But do we perceive it that way? Does that change? Do we need to research that? Small group stages, some of the things that were brought up yesterday. Those stages of small group, but does that fit in a synchronous, collaborative environment? Do we really go through those stages that way anymore? Okay. Face-to-face, you mentioned the social presence, this idea of creating an online community and a sense of community. We want to create that sense of presence there, that sense of everything we have face-to-face. We want it to feel that way online. But do our students, do they care? Have they changed what their needs are? Right? Castells talks about mass self-communication. In my classes, I call it mass interaction. We've moved from mass media to this mass interaction where everybody shares with everybody. We need to revisit mass media because mass media is struggling to figure out what to call this time. Is it new media? What do we label it as, and how do we define it, how we describe it? Okay, so what do you think? And that's where I want to open it up to discussion.